I'm really sorry I cannot be there with you, but in this case we see one of the positive effects that technology can offer, and that is on aspects that relates how technology is helping us, supporting us, opening up new horizons. I think we have many experiences about that. Today, I would like to talk with you about something that relates to our responsibility to correctly read the data and the reflections that everybody has to go through, both as human beings and as our roles, our responsibilities towards younger generations, in order to be able to recognize risks, factor of risks that we have to be able to avoid. So I will say some things that are really heavy to hear and to say, but these are necessary. The attention to everything that avoids that technology becomes a condition that makes the human being poorer and not richer. This is something we really have to avoid and think about. So the first thing I would like to talk to you about is, and I think I can show you the slides. Perfect. An international thinking on the situation that relates to the development of human function in our species. What do I mean by that? The most important academies of research in the world, already before the pandemic, had sent an SOS, a really important SOS to every structure that dealt with mental health. And in this SOS, the most explicit indications related to a definition that was made before the COVID-19 crisis, and that was the pandemic of mood disorders and neurodevelopmental disorders. So even before something that relates to the human global health in our planet, there was already a SOS relating to mental health of our children. These academies you see here, including the WHO and some commissions that Brussels had put up, that had organized, identified the four aspects that I show you here on the slide as aspects that had a progressive expansion. Scientists that observed these phenomena were very worried, and they felt the need to call it a pandemic. For example, neurodevelopmental disorders. We started from the situation of a diagnosis of children with symptoms that related to autism and pervasive syndromes. One each 10,000 children in the 80s, and 1 on 30 children recently. So we see that there is an increase of the disorders of neurodevelopment, but we see that starting from the 80s, according to the data of the ACDC of Atlanta, these neurodevelopmental disorders have really increased. We are able to identify them really more precisely than we were before, but this increase is so high that we have to think about that. That means that a child, each 38 in the Western world, has a vulnerability, is born with a vulnerability of the neurodevelopment that relates the way in which his or her brain, in the phase of the development, will manifest its own need for support and to be helped. So we have to be able to recognize this pandemic, because we have to consider that this explains how the whole system of health is doing, and it's needing new paradigms. And what I care about in particular with this concept of serviceable science relates to the other three factors. Factors that in health disorders had previously not taken into considerations well-being or diseases as an internal condition of mood, of something we feel inside. So you can see here indicators that we need to understand. What does early depression mean? That means that many studies shows that while 20 years ago the indicators of depression, of mood disorders, I think these two go together, related to the adult population. And if you remember that, we used to call that exhaustion. So people were exhausted because a perpetual condition of stress in response to the complexity that the organism had to deal with, brought to a depletion of the resources that we had. So the figures that we have to look at today talk about mood disorders that come earlier and earlier. So in the pre-teenage years, we see some data that are really worrisome. And these data show an even earlier onset from the pre-teenagers years to that phase that is in childhood, basically. You can notice that I use the past tense because we used to call it childhood. 3 years ago, we used to call it that. So in synthesis, we see an increase of the neurodevelopmental disorders. So much so that we speak about a pandemic, an even early depression, so early that we call it a pandemic of depression. And it starts so early that it exacerbates our capacity to deal with stress. So the way to deal with the global situation is really taking up all our resources. And then there are the new addictions. Scientific research already talked a lot about addictions. The usual addictions such as drug addictions, gambling addictions, alcohol addictions. But there is a new addiction which relates to a use of devices and of the internet connection as a parallel condition to life, not only during the day but also during the night, and that is the dopaminergic addiction to technology. In order to be able to explain all of this, and I have to synthesize because we do not have that much time, I would like to show you a video. This is the first example that is shown on the web of a situation of dopaminergic addiction to technology. DSM, the Handbook of Mental Health, calls this Internet Addiction Disorder, IAD. This kind of video is really heavy, is really strong, and so I apologize, but this is the only way to explain how an addiction works, an addiction that is related to a technology that is now changing our brain and how we manage desire and addiction. Mom, wait, I just have to do something, just a moment. You don't have to do that, just a second. You have to switch it off. No, yes, no. As you can see, he's protesting. He doesn't want to switch the computer off. You're annoying me. I don't want to switch it off. Then I'll do it. Mom, I'm switching off. I just want to read here. Do you want me to switch it off? I just want to read. Then I'll switch it off. I just have to read here. I don't care. Mom, listen to me. You're a stupid bitch. Go to hell. I hope you die. Sasha is becoming hysterical. It's a normal reaction when you try to fight an addiction. Stupid rules. His mom is trying to strike a deal with him. Sasha sees an error on the screen. What the hell? Calm down. Why? Why there's no connection anymore? Where is everything? What sites do you need? Tell me. There's Google. Why does it have to be this way? Because you have to understand that you have to manage the computer and not be controlled by the computer. Do you want to see how controlled I am if I shoot you? No, Mom, stop. I think I have to switch the video off because it becomes harder and harder to look at it. I needed it to show you something, and that is that this addiction that is presented when we have a withdrawal of a drug or something similar to a drug is as strong in our pathways that allows us to control ourselves. So we cannot control how we feel and how we react to life anymore. So a condition of addiction to technology is not a condition of anxiety, of a general anxiety, or a mood disorder that at an educational level we see is happening in our children and also in ourselves. This is actually a condition that's really different. I explain this to my students with fever. To have a fever at 37 degrees is different than have a fever at 40 degrees. So when we have such an important alterations in our pathways, we have to consider that this situation has crossed all boundaries, and we have to be able not only to foresee these situations, but also prevent them. In order to talk about prevention, I would like to show you some research. I would like to ask to see you because I can see you and I feel alone right now, and I'm not able to talk to you that well. I am able to see, you are able to see me. I hope you are able to see me while I cannot see you, but I will try and explain the first studies on the interference of the connection web. These studies study the effect of electric fields on human cells and especially in neural cells. It's absurd, but it was so well studied and so explicitly studied that it's ridiculous to keep not interpreting the data in a honest way. From 1996, you can see it here, the data of this study. Everything points to the fact that the earlier we expose our life as organisms to electric fields, to electromagnetic fields, the earlier we have an impact on our cells. This first study of 96 showed how the exposures to magnetic fields had in adults in children of 10 years or 5 years old had an impact of transmission to a neuronal cell that was completely different for a series of reasons, from the structure of the skull to the functioning of neuroplasticity, which is the fundamental mechanism of our children's development.
So I cannot delve deeper into this topic because it would take up way too much time. However, the most recent studies do explain that there is an actual change when it comes to the balance between white matter and gray matter, especially during adolescence. And they also explain that these disorders, which are all related to each other, show and are manifested in a similar way when it comes to our limbic system, and when it comes to the fact that such system is having more trouble in managing all these emotions and all these feelings, especially when it comes to depressive emotions or aggressive emotions such as the anger you saw in the video I just showed. So the difference in electromagnetic field is a physical difference because there is a change, a shift in the structures. And this means that there is a shift in our whole condition when it comes to our health. This is the way I explain it to my students. If we should not think of our psyche as the foam in a wave, on the other hand, we should think of our psyche as if it was a vector force, as if it was the movement itself. So the way we feel it, it triggers reactions that not only relate to the way we think about things, but that on the other hand have an effect on our whole body. Also when it comes to chronic inflammatory states, especially when it comes to the effects on dopamine and cortisol, which I will explain in a few minutes. So we can say that electromagnetic fields during pregnancy are particularly risky because if we just place a screen in front of the belly of a pregnant woman, then we see an alteration. And we also see a neuronal migration, so our neurons migrate and change. And such changes are also published and outlined by scientific literature. This is the one you're seeing is a comprehensive study from 2018, so it didn't, of course, outline all the news we had ever since the outburst of the pandemic. However, we must not forget that being exposed to electromagnetic fields is something that might be really hard to manage. What do I mean by that? Is that we all would be in trouble if we were not in front of our screen, and I myself could never really imagine myself living without being in front of a screen. However, we do have to learn how to live so that we can minimize the risks. And we also have to know that in some specific time frames, for example, during the first 1,000 days of a person's life, so ever since the conception up until they're 1.5 years old, well, during this time phase, our brain tries to develop itself, and it is also influenced by the influences of electromagnetic fields. So we can say that the beginning of our neuropsychological development, everything that happens around us has an impact on how we will be, also personality-wise, and this is something our body does deal with. So, to sum up, how are our children doing in these constantly changing generations? This slide is called Solitude, Loneliness, and I'm really happy that this topic is deemed important by my colleagues who are at the Congress with you as well. And I would like to mention my latest work on this topic. It was published a little over a month ago, and this is in my research. I studied all generations, so from toddlers up until seniors, and I saw that the most frequent emotion that was expressed in this study, that again studies all generation, is solitude, is loneliness. The feeling, the emotion that we all feel, and that I guess we could say makes us vulnerable, is loneliness. And the researchers that I address in my study do point the finger at technology. How it is likely that we cannot think of technology as a causal factor, but rather as a correlative factor, a related factor. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that we're living in a very complex time for our fully social species. The I is fully immersed in the we, yet our social behaviors have drastically decreased because we simply do not have time to have meaningful relationships, and so we have to delegate our relationships from an early age up until old age, and so we relate on systems to help our children get an education, play, learn how to read, do sports. And when it comes to our seniors, we hire professionals or services to help them with their needs. But also when it comes to ourselves, we adults, we spend more time looking at artificial social media than by looking at each other, than by sharing our breath, our heartbeat. And these are all concepts that were also outlined by research. And once again, we have the topic of loneliness. We are living in a time where we simply do not have enough time for meaningful relationships, and therefore there were cracks. And these cracks were filled by artificial relationships. Our researchers say that we as people need light, food, water. However, if I do not have still water, I will have to use bottled water. If I do not have sunlight, I will have to use an artificial light. An artificial light is not the same as sunlight. So, if I use an artificial light when I absolutely need light, then I will have satisfied my needs. However, if I were to only live at the light of an artificial light, then my body would slowly start to get sick. And this metaphor helps me explain how the process of technology addiction works. And this is a process that we are essentially all going through. Relationships are something that is so hard to get in this specific era, and therefore the condition of I equals we is realized by an artificial system. If I manage to explain this, then the video that I showed you a few minutes ago will help you understand what it means to depend. What I would like to show you now, although I don't really have that much time, relates to the feeling of desire. So what is the difference between desire and depend? If I desire something, I'm feeling the lack of something, I long for something and I miss it. So I call for it. I long for something that I believe is truly good for me. The word itself is amazing because it comes from the Latin desiderus, and it means to long for the stars. And when I explain this, I say that it essentially means bringing the future in the present. When it comes to depend, on the other hand, you can see an image that relates to the meaning in Italian of this word, dependere, which means pendere da, hang from something. And when I depend from something, I'm the main protagonist. I want what's better for me. So it is much different than desire, and it relates to deep concepts when it comes also to our psychological freedom. And now I will show you another video. I would like to explain it to you. In this hilarious video, children are given a candy that smells amazing so that they will feel the need to eat. They will want to eat it. And the experiment goes like this. You will get 2 candies, 2 marshmallows, if you are able to wait and not eat the first one.
Stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right.
Guardate proprio l'umano.
Look how cute this child is and how these children behave when they're faced with desire. This deals with our ability to wait, our ability to mediate, our ability to wait for the desire to show up. And they start smelling the candy, and that fosters the addiction. They're really, they have a great smell. Researchers use a candy with a great smell because for the longest time we have been guided by our smell when it comes to what we ate.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay?
Guardate I comportamenti di attesa.
Look how they behave as they're waiting.
Okay?
Look at this incredibly small child.
Lei tenta di resistere.
She tries to resist the addiction, and he tries to, but you will see what happens now.
Ora vedrete che fa. Guardate come si...
Look how they're trying to resist the desire.
È proprio fondamentale nella specie.
Desire is essential to our species. And when I will explain to you how our adolescents are doing, I'm mostly shocked by how they do not have a desire anymore.
All right, so I'm going to leave and then I'll come back, okay?
Guardate lei.
Look at her.
So I'm going to leave and then I'll come back, okay?
She just can't resist the desire.
Lei non resiste al desiderio, non ci resiste proprio. Ecco che arriva la risposta al desiderio.
And now they
Ecco che arriva
start
la risposta al
responding to the
desiderio.
desire.
You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Good? Yeah.
So to give you another one?
You wanted to
I
eat
can
it,
have
didn't you?
both.
Yeah.
Ora finalmente
Give you another one?
He finally has 2 now, and he had such a big desire that he was forced to do so.
Ecco, a questa situazione di adesso via desiderio. Finalmente perché vi ho
So why did I show you this video,
Perché vi ho fatto vedere questo video, pur avendo
even if I
il
didn't
tempo
have
misurato?
a lot of
Perché
time?
quando il report
Because when a
dell'UNICEF,
report
e
by
quindi non
UNICEF,
delle nostre ricerche
and
di
so I'm not referring to a
laboratorio,
research
persone
carried
di
out
scienza
by
che vanno
professional
misurate
scientists, but
gli
rather I'm
anni, ma
referring
proprio una
to
ricerca che
a research that essentially
semplicemente
collects
raccoglie
demographic
dati
data.
demografici di
And
riferimento,
this research
pubblica
explained what you can read on the slides in Italian. It says that there is a suicide among adolescents every 11 minutes in our world. And I was shocked by this result. I wondered why. The fact that in our Western world, an adolescent takes their life every 10 minutes is really unbearable. Because in our adolescence is where we are supposed to want to live the most.
Da modificare potente ancestrale nella nostra specie.
We have to modify these conditions that transform the self, the unity mind and body, in an adult unity that can manage the relationships with others and can generate a new life. So the phylogenetic process of species is ruling our life, and is the period of the budding of the life. And if in this period there's a suicide each 11 minutes in the world, then there's a problem that it's even bigger than we thought. We cannot speak about that anymore as it was something that related to others. Demographic figures says that one in 7 child suffer of a mental health disorder, which is correlating to mood, as I was showing you at the beginning. And I would like to show you which the mood disorders are, because we don't have much time. So we can see that the situation is really tragic. You can see that there's everything here. Mood disorders has a really broad range. We go from suicidal index to aggressive index. The figures we have on baby gang, on violence, on bullying, on cyberbullying, on games that, through the situation of gaming online, bring an auto-destruction process in order to take part in a situation that is completely not real, is something that I cannot show you today, but that really have a strong impact on me. We cannot close the eyes in front of this. And one thing I would like to talk about in particular, self-harm. Self-harm is one of these 7 factors. If you have children, if you have teenagers, look at them, because they have many scars on them, and the situation of having pain on their body because they cannot manage their deep emotions, they cannot tolerate the frustration and the deep pain. This is nothing to be, this is something we really have to be aware of, because they didn't develop the capacities to be resilient. And resilience is not resistance. Resilience is being able to adapt to every situation, reaching the right situations for our help as a psychological level. I cannot talk about that. I have to talk about the dopaminergic system. What is it? Dopamine is the system that in millions of years of evolution our species has perfected in such a way that our brain controls the process of reward. And what does that mean? Even before being able to think and to be such complex being, we had to choose what was desirable and what we needed to flee. And what was desirable, we needed to look for that, such as relationships, food, protection, and we needed to flee from our enemies, and so on. So brain has perfected in millions of years of evolution molecular factors, molecular chemicals that enable us to control our mood. And these chemicals are molecules. Dopamine is the most well known. And what does that do? to the associative cortex and limbic structures that you see are in the middle of our brain, they send a neuroelectric and biochemical signal that means that we got a reward, and so it pushes us to search again for this feeling. When we are rewarded by well-being, our associative cortexes give us the task to look for more. So the studies that started analyzing all of these are pretty recent. It's been 15 years. In 2012, there's the first study of Robinson is from 1998, and it shows that each time that our devices, that we get a notification or our devices vibrates, our brain synthesizes dopamine. So we receive the signal of the relationship with technology as a signal of activation of something that relates to our identity. And we are rewarded with dopamine. This reward makes it so that we have a necessity for this dopamine. It's a dopamine that we can reach really easily. And if I cannot get that from looking at people that I love, or being with people that I love, or a reward given by my teachers at school, or the relationships with my classmates, because I am alone, I am abandoned to do and not to be with someone, this is a really valid alternative that we use to fill the crack. The figures you can see here are from 5 years ago, because after that we were not able to collect them anymore because they didn't give them to us. So to measure how many times we touch the screen of our devices show how the condition of perpetually being is really important. So connected, is really important. 5 years ago, it was 2,600 times, but today it would surely be even more. And if you think that we have the minutes, the figures that relate to the minutes of the time that we spend on our cell phones, you will see that we are constantly touching our screen as it was a way to broaden ourselves, and this is an element we have to consider. The dopaminergic system activates our reaction, our self-reaction that relates to our identities, our belonging, that are the principal structure of our mental health in our species. And when that happens so early that we can call it digital babysitting, then this interferes from the electrical field to the change of the balance in gray and white matter, to the activation of dopamine in an artificial way, and everything becomes alterated, such as here. He is 8 months old, and he should be interested in playing, in exploring, and this mom is really satisfied by this reaction because she truly believes that this means that he is really intelligent, that he is intelligent so early because he can coordinate his fingers on the screen. You can hear the crying, the desperate crying of this baby. What does she do? She gives him the cell phone back, and he stops crying. He's not angry anymore. So when I saw this video, I myself was criticized because they said that taking a game, taking a toy from a child is the same thing. Well, we saw that it's not exactly the same thing. Only by taking away the breast from a child has the same reaction, because it relates to a survival instinct. And this is already an addiction. It's like he needed that to survive. She is not trying to soothe him. Playing with his mom is not soothing for him. There is already a condition of strong interference with the pathways that control our emotional reaction. I would like to show you how playing should look like. She is 18 years old. She takes this wire and she uses it to play, and it's a symbolic game because she is pretending to have a telephone. If you listen to her, she's not saying any word. She has this meta language, and she uses non-verbal communication, the glance, the body language, the expressions. So when we are that small, we don't need to depend on artificial conditions. We need to generate symbolic imagination. And this calls for relationship, because what you saw is not how she talks at the telephone, it's how her mom talks at the telephone. We could say many things of her behavior and also of her mom, because we can see a lot of how her mom behaves. You can see she's pausing. It's an interpretational pause. She is gesturing. It's really funny. It's wonderful. What to say? All of this to show you, and I am about to conclude. I'm just gonna show you a last video. On these pages, we can see how the handbook of mental health that is small, using the word,
i propri sintomi di astinenza,
the absence of tolerance, the lack of control. The prevalence when this handbook was written were really low, and now we have prevalences that are above 7%. Gaming is another thing we would have to address, but I don't have the time. I would like only to speak about this game. It's about a granny that is a murderer, and the game entails that the children have to kill the granny. I would like to talk about that because if you look at the review on social media of families, of children that are using this game, we see indications of really a game that is really liked by people. There are many studies that show how this has something that impacts the way of we manage our relationships with the others and our affection. I find this really hard to talk about that. These are more simple data, and I would like to talk to you about that. We talk about shifting of attention. Now when I go to Congress, I hear a really loving attitude from the participants, but they always have their cell phones in their hands. We do a lot of things while we have our cell phones in the hand. We drive with our cell phones. But our attention has a limited capacity. We cannot divide our attention more than a certain limit because we always have the same resource as a species. So the studies are showing that we have diminished our capacity of deep elaboration of contents, and we have an elaboration which is more and more superficial, both in the learning fields that are in our daily life. We see shifting and not deep elaboration. We cannot distinguish truthful information by from biased information or even false beliefs. Do you want to also talk about anxiety? If we don't have our cell phones anymore, we experience an anxiety. And why is that? Because the cell phone is a part of ourselves. We have memories in that. We have our relationships in that. There is a really beautiful movie that shows if If we exchange our shoes with each other when we are at the table, then we laugh. But if we exchange our cell phones, then disasters occur, because in our cell phones we have our secrets, our lies. So the cell phones has become something we put our identity in, and we cannot think anymore that it's something that we manage as it was nothing. We have to manage it and being aware of it, that this is the situation. We don't have to judge ourselves, but we have to understand that. Understanding is the first step to modify our behavior, or the risk is that all of this is fake. This is just something that is made up. Anxiety is connected to depression. I already talked about that, and it's clear from a point of view of, for example, if we go in a restaurant, in a park, in a supermarket, and we see that we are all connected, because in this way we are able to have our doses of dopamine. I cannot explain that better than that, but I think you already know what I'm talking about. It's also pretty clear what this does to our sleep cycles and to the alternation of neuronal pathways that relate to the continuation of our visual system up to crisis of new form of epilepsy that you will read on every newspaper, because there's a lot. We don't need the Academy of Science for that. But why? Why do we keep not seeing that? What's the condition that's stopping us from doing that? These are hikikomori. The number of hikikomori is rising even in our countries. In Japan, we have more than 1.5 million of kids who are closed in their room. They don't go out anymore, and they only have artificial relationships. How is that possible? I would like to show you this last video. It's a song of a rapper. The title is Nomphobia, and it's from a couple years ago, that talks about interference with a society that let all of this happen without prevention. But it's a really powerful tool, what we are talking about. We cannot give that to young children without being able to understand the mediation that is necessary.
Corre con il capo chinato, sempre depressi, sorridenti, solo con il Instagram, sempre connessi tra di noi, ma persi di vista, posti un'altra foto, posti come ti senti, in posti in cui dovresti parlare con i tuoi parenti, ma tanto ormai sti giorni sono tutti gli stessi, sono troppo veloci, ma c'è sempre tempo per un selfie. Mio padre odia WhatsApp, usa il 30-10, ripete sempre, a 20 anni sembrate lenti, appena nato ti crea un account, impari prima ad usare il tablet che a dire ciao, siamo concorrenti di una vita virtuale in cui la vita vale meno che un mi piace, e chi se li scorda i pomeriggi con quel super santo, quando eravamo bambini con nessun sogno infranto, adesso i sogni sono fatti di follower, postano cazzate fino a farsi sfottere, ma tanto oggi siamo tutti omofobici, cresciamo bimbi già nati tecnologici, questa la definisco bastarda dipendenza, altro che macchinette, droga e sigaretta, bastarda dipendenza, altro che macchinette, droga e sigaretta. Cerco di liberarmi, ma qui nessuno mi dà retta, vorrei attenzione, la tua mente sfetta, incollati a quel cazzo di schermo AMOLED, imprigionati squadri come costume in carcere, e ricordo il mio primo cellulare, lo usavo a tempo per qualche video da registrare, era solo un optional, non una dipendenza, quando andavo a scuola, io ci andavo senza, ho paura per i miei figli, giuro, non vengo a pensare che ci sprecheranno tutto il loro tempo, proverò ad evitarlo, lo prometto, lo giuro. giuro, bisogna guardare indietro per migliorare. Lo giuro, questa è la generazione di noi falliti, di generazione che si ispira a dei fallimenti, dove quando si suicida una ragazzina tutti fanno a gara a chi posta il video prima. Una ragazzina tutti fanno a gara a chi posta il
Ecco,
video
questa
prima.
scena,
This last scene
ecco, questa
expressly
scena finale indica proprio
shows
quello che
what
per me
prevention
è il
means to
significato
me. This
della
song was written
prevenzione.
when
Questa canzone è stata scritta quando c'è stato questo fatto
a
di cronaca di
suicide
questo
happened,
suicidio che è stato videoregistrato da talmente
and
tante
it was recorded
persone.
by many,
Vedete i
many
bimbi
people,
cadere
and
giù. È necessario un
the
altro
videos
atteggiamento, è
showed
necessario una
the
prevenzione che
person
non sia
committing
una
suicide.
parola, ma una
So we do
consapevolezza.
need to raise
La mia
awareness on
proposta,
this,
lo
and
dico
my
proprio
vision, and I
chiaramente
want
ed
to stress
esplicitamente,
this
non è
very
possibile un
clearly,
tempo senza
is
tecnologia,
that we cannot
ma è
fathom a
possibile un
world
tempo in
without
cui ci sia
technology,
più
but
umano.
we can
Ci
fathom a
deve
world that
essere
is more human, with more
un'attenzione nel
attention to our
prendere la
mental health
salute
and to
mentale
its
e a
protection.
proteggerla. Quindi
So we
dobbiamo
need to enhance
aumentare l'umano
the human
che sta dentro il
component in
processo
the
educante di
educative process
accompagnamento, perché
for our
altrimenti
child,
questa
because
predominanza
otherwise
di
this
vuoto
predominance
nell'umano
of
consente
void
tutto
in our
quello che ho cercato di
human
riassumervi per
element
sommi capi.
will
E
allow all
quindi
of this to
riassunto del
continue.
riassunto a
So
parole
we
mie,
can sum it
dall'online
up by saying from
all'offline
online to
all'off.
on
E
life
con
to on
questo io
love.
vi chiedo
I
scusa di non poter
apologize
essere con
because
voi
I'm not here
e di
with you, and I
dovermi
will now have to
scommettere
log
perché
off
sono in un
because I'm currently
ospedale, ma ecco,
at the
sono
hospital, but I'm really
grata di aver
happy
avuto
that
la
I
possibilità
was
di parlarvene
happy to talk to
con
you
il tono
about
della
this, and
voce
that
che
you
vi
could
dice
were able
quanto
to
c'è bisogno
hear
di
how we
essere
need to
tutti
be
insieme in
united to
questa
tackle this
sfida.
challenge. Thank you.